everyone. Welcome to another episode of Bones and Stones. Today we have Justin Partiger here to talk with us, who is a newly appointed associate professor at New York University. And he's doing some very interesting work in South Africa. Justin is originally South African, I should say. But he's doing some interesting work in an area of South Africa that is underexplored in many ways, an area of KwaZulu-Natal called Pondoland. And he's been working in that sort of region, as well as at a site in that area called Waterfall Bluff. So Justin, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us. If you could just give us maybe a bit of a brief introduction about your work in KwaZulu-Natal province, we really appreciate it.
Yeah, sure, Matt. Just to clarify, Pondoland is in the Eastern Cape province, and
Ah,
we're on the Wild Coast, just south of KZN, in which I think some of your listeners might be familiar with sites like Sibudu
okay.
Cave and other.
Apologies.
No worries. Yeah, it's interesting, really interesting part of the country. But basically, I am, as you said, a South African. I born in the country, started my archaeological career there, did both my undergrad honors and master's degrees through Wits University, working with people like Lynn Wadley, Marlies Lombard, and cut my teeth at some pretty awesome archaeological sites like Sibudu Cave, where I got, down and dirty doing real awesome Middle Stone Age archaeology at some of the best sites in the world. And like all of you, had opportunities to be exposed to world-class research from a really young age and to get out onto the front lines of what it is to do field archaeology. And it was at that point that I basically became a Stone Age archaeologist. Lynn Wadley told me that pointy, sharp things are really fun to play with and that we can do cool experiments with them, especially. I got to do a whole bunch of hunting experiments early on in my career that kind of kickstarted things. And essentially from there, developed a love for stone tools and really to understand how they were made and what they tell us about human evolution and human behavior. And I left South Africa to go and travel the continent and fell in love with an American, which led me to the States, where I did my PhD and ultimately landed my dream job at New York University, where I currently am as associate professor, as you said, as assistant professor. And I head the African Paleosciences Laboratory at NYU. And basically what we do is combine fieldwork in South Africa, where we focus on questions of human origins and human evolution in the late Pleistocene, the last 100,000 years or so. And then experimental research, where we focus on how stone tools are made, how they're used, and what they can tell us about other aspects of human behavior, such as the evolution of our brains, our social systems, and our biologies, our hands, our arms, our elbows, our shoulders, essentially how the cultural and biological systems come together to form a unified whole that really characterizes who we are and how we've evolved.
Wow,
That's
that's
me in
quite
a nutshell.
interesting. It sounds like a very well-rounded approach that you're sort of applying to human evolution in your lab. I think all too often archaeologists sort of get caught up in just looking at the technology, but these things are not produced in a vacuum. They happen through biological, cultural, social, and ecological systems. So that's really quite interesting. Tim, you have a question for Justin?
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Justin, for that introduction. I was just wondering your work at Waterfall Bluff, how that ties in with the goals of your lab and your colleagues and so on working in the States, and then why that particular site was chosen.
Yeah, so Waterfall Bluff is part of a larger research project in Eastern Pondoland that my colleagues and I have been working on since 2011. It's a project led by four co-directors, Dr. Eric Fisher at Arizona State University, Dr. Haley Quathra at the Council for Marine Geosciences in South Africa, and tongue ties, Dr. Irene Esteban at Wits University. So the four of us essentially have been co-directing this project for the last 9 years now. It's almost a decade. It's crazy. But the goals of the project originally essentially come from a big question that a lot of archaeologists try and answer, which is how have humans evolved to respond to massive changes in our climates and our environments? Everyone's today really interested in this question about what are we doing to survive some of the most dramatic climate changes that our species has ever seen, that are happening more rapidly than ever before. And one recourse to answering that question is the archaeological record. And the problem with it is that it's very difficult to actually pinpoint what the relationship between changing climates and changing human behavior actually is. And there are very few sites in the world that give you the information to do this. So we zoned in on one key part of climate change that we thought we could actually address using archaeological data, and that is the effects of sea level changes on human behavior. Oceans rise and oceans fall. Places like Cape Town, for example, are at massive risk of oceans rising at the moment because you gotta move, you gotta get out of the way, otherwise you get drowned. There are lots of parts of South Africa that have this effect of rising oceans rising. To the extent that most archaeologists working over the last few decades haven't been able to find signatures of humans living during periods when oceans were quite far away, that is glacial phases. And it's that period that we're really interested in, trying to see how humans behave in response to really low ocean levels during glacial phases and really high ocean levels during interglacial phases. But there's almost no place in South Africa where you can do this research because it's been washed away largely. So we were looking at some maps and trying to check out the distance between coastlines and the coastal margin where the ocean actually sits, and try and see if we could find a place that would actually give this evidence that we're looking for. And we zoned in on Pondoland, part of the wild coast of South Africa on the eastern Indian Ocean coastline, where the continental margin is only about 8 kilometers wide. And so it provides a perfect experimental laboratory for looking at how humans respond to changes in sea levels and the climates that are associated with them in areas where there wouldn't have been as much of a shift in that the coastline as there would have been in other parts of our continent. And so we chose Pondoland to start our surveys to address this research question. Went in basically into an area that had been only marginally explored archaeologically. The last work that had been done there was in the 1930s, save for a few random surveys here and there, largely unknown. And that's not just a matter of chance. It's also because Pondoland is an area that was a former apartheid homeland in South Africa. It was purposefully underdeveloped by the apartheid government and really left as like a backwater. And so a lot of archaeological work focused in the Cape region, in Lesotho, outside of South Africa, in Limpopo and other parts of the country where the apartheid government essentially put more resources into the work and supported universities. And the Pondoland was left behind, not because it didn't have anything, but because of geopolitical reasons. And so we went in 2011 and started some of the first baseline surveys in South Africa to look at Pondoland's archaeology.
Wow, fantastic. Matt Lauder, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. This has been really interesting. The Eastern Cape is a very special place in both Macarawan and my heart as well. With us having done obviously a lot of research there, the Munzi Springs and myself down in the Sundays River Valley. And for me, it was always interesting dealing with the Sundays River landscape because, you know, with the terrace formation in the Sundays River Valley, it's also got a lot to do with sea level changes and stuff. It's quite interesting how you are, you've been intentionally focusing in on that area to work out, you know, those dynamic kind of landscape changes. But could we maybe just talk to the chronology of the site that you guys have been working on? What kind of periods are we dealing with?
Yeah, absolutely. So Waterfall Bluff, one of the sites we discovered in 2011 during our initial surveys, beautiful rock shelter site located next to a 60-meter steep rock waterfall that cascades into the Indian Ocean. The site has a sequence at the base right now, which is not bedrock. It's the furthest down we've gotten, in excess of 30,000 years. So we're looking at a period, an interglacial phase. So it's a warm period in our climate's history when the ocean is quite close to the site. But importantly, what we discovered in excavating the sequence was a full glacial occupation at the site, which is the first in South Africa to document humans living along an ice age ocean shoreline. And that's the stuff that's missing everywhere else in South Africa and in a lot of parts of Africa. And that dates to between 25 and 19,000 years ago.
That's cool.
And is a key part of the site's sequence.
Sorry, just to follow up there, if I can jump in, Gareth, that's all right. Justin, obviously a lot of the other Cape coastal sites as well. There's been some work by Jane Wilkins' team, I think it's down at Pinnacle Point, if I'm not mistaken, looking at older evidence for volcanic tuff, for example. Do you expect you maybe find some of that old evidence as well? I mean, you talk about a lift of around 30,000 years. Do you think you'll find older layers with that kind of evidence as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Pondoland, the oldest deposits we found in Pondoland at open air, what we call paleosols, ancient living surfaces, much like what you work on, Matt, are around 280 to 310,000 years old. So they basically clip the period of our species evolution in Africa. So we know that occupation in the landscape's ancient. Whether or not these ancient hominins used rock shelters at this time is an open question, and we haven't reached bedrock. You know, the best way we can guess about the depth of the deposits is to look at the cave formation, and those studies suggest that it is quite a deep sequence. And if we get down to the 60, 70,000 year layers, which have the Toba tephra that you referred to, we can then put them on the same isochron as these other sites in South Africa and link everything up with a single timeline, which is awesome. But until then, our focus is really on this last glacial maximum period, because it is just so unique in South Africa. There's just nothing else like it. And it gives us a unique glimpse into what humans are doing when oceans are quite far away on the coastline.
Justin, before we begin to wrap up here, can you give us any insight into the types of technological changes that you may have found at your in your survey area and at your site that might be unique to this particular time period in the glacial maximum? We do understand if there's information that is sensitive to publications that we're not asking you to share, but are there any insights or thoughts that you might have?
Yeah, we have a lot of cool stuff that's coming out of the sites, and all of it's unique because no one's ever looked at what a glacial foraging signal looks like in South Africa. So everything that comes out is like the first, which is really cool. Some of it looks like what we find at inland sites at the time. So a lot of production of little bladelets, mobile toolkits, basically. So groups that would be geared towards moving around landscapes quite extensively. We find that at the site, suggesting connections over larger areas. And we find a little bit of raw material coming from inland locations in the Drakensberg Mountains, things like chert and chalcedony. But most importantly, we found human remains that date to the LGM. So we have 2 teeth that are currently under study, which are the 1 of 4 in Africa that date to the LGM, and that tell us what our human ancestors look like at a time that's almost previously undescribed anatomically. So we can do DNA on those teeth. We can tell who they are, if they track some of the genomes that we find amongst modern groups in the area. We can do dental analysis on them to determine what they're eating. We can analyze the isotopes of those dental remains to look at where in the landscape those foods are coming from. And that's going to form a key question answer a key question for us, which is how far did these people move, and how far inland did they go? We're interested in how these sites are connected to others in the landscape, such as sites in Lesotho or further north in the Free State. And then in terms of lithics, we have tons of broken stone. One cool thing that we found that hasn't been documented before is that people are collecting mussels, and along with mussels come a whole bunch of little pebbles that get stuck to the barnacles of the mussels. And they're actually using those as raw material. So they're putting them on an anvil and smashing them open to make little flakes. So they're getting a food resource. It's a behavior called embedded procurement. So basically they go out and get one resource, and at the same time they get another. And that's really awesome. So that's a new pattern we're finding at the site too.
So then, Justin, just very
Wow,
on that, just very briefly, a non-lithic material, are you guys getting some ornamentation, some beads, any worked shell, worked bone, that kind of stuff from the LGM?
Not from the LGM yet. Most of the really cool stuff, as is always the case, comes from sort of into the Pleistocene Holocene transition layers.
Okay.
And there we have work bone, we have Nasaria shells, which are indigenous to this part of the coast, and they actually match shells that have been found up in the Lesotho highlands during the LGM. So in the highlands, there are LGM Indian Ocean beads. So we know that these sites are connected during the LGM. It's just that we haven't found the reciprocal evidence down in Pondoland yet. But lots of beads, lots of worked bone in more recent layers.
Awesome.
Wow, it just sounds like a fantastic project, Justin. And just before we wrap up here, you are looking for volunteers. We've seen a few sort of flyers go out here and there. Do you want to is there any details that people can get in touch with you if they're listening to this and might be interested in participating in one of your field seasons?
Yeah, we've taken the COVID break to really develop our online presence, and we have an awesome Facebook page, P5 Project on Facebook, Twitter too, also P5 Project. We have an amazing website where Eric Fisher has essentially developed these virtual tours through Pondoland, where you can actually walk along the coasts. You can get a sense of the sounds and the feelings of what it's like to be in this incredibly unique environment. And people can go there. They can contact us through those channels for volunteering opportunities. We're back in the field next year. Every year we've had at least 15 students, all from Southern Africa. Actually, we had a student from Cameroon last year. We're strongly in support of the development of indigenous archaeology and archaeologists. So we prioritize those applications from students at South African universities, sub-Saharan African universities. They will get trained in the full suite of modern archaeological techniques. And then there's scope for honors, masters, and even PhD projects coming out of the sites. So you can contact us through any of those channels for any of this work, probably kicking back into gear next year if we're all safe and sound by then.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Justin. This was a highly interesting talk, and maybe down the line, if you wouldn't mind, we might ask you to come back on to further discuss some of this research and the other projects that are coming out of your lab, which also sound very interesting. So I think that's going to wrap it up for us. Thank you very much, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks to you guys. It's been a pleasure.